Hello.
Oh, so
How
my there was a
how are you?
very there was a very weird play in football.
Yeah.
There was a kicker that kicked it twice, and we were trying to
Oh,
figure out what was going to happen.
right. Welcome to Chrono. I'll say something real quick. I'll mention. Um, I was on here a little bit earlier playing around, and what I was planning on doing was uh, having you test out the rotation once we talk about it to see how much quickness you can keep up on yourself. But there's like a bug where self-generated quickness, your boons just disappear every once in a while.
Oh
I don't
yeah,
know. Yeah. I don't know why that happens. So we're just gonna focus on the rotation and not worry about quickness uptime as such. We're just gonna trust that your quickness uptime is good, even though we won't really be able to test it here.
okay. Oh, should I already put up boons. Should I keep
You're
them?
you're good. That's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, no worries. All right. Are you recording everything already? Are we ready to
Yep,
get started?
yep, we are good.
Okay. Uh, you're free to stop me anytime and let me know if you want to ask questions or anything. The way I generally do these is we'll go over the gear first, different gear combinations that you could use for different builds and stuff. And then we'll go over the traits, why the traits are what they are, and why the ones we don't use are not used. Um, then we can go over the utility skills and stuff, and finally the rotation itself. Sound
Okay,
good?
sounds good.
Alrighty. Let's start with the gear. Actually, one thing real quick. Have you looked at the Power Quickness Chrono build on Snow Crow's website?
Yes,
Okay.
I followed that.
Okay. Uh, what I'm going to go over with you is going to be an alternative to what they have on their site. They don't really list it anymore, but it's a perfectly valid alternative, and in fact, it's better in certain scenarios. But Snowcrows removed it from their site. So, regarding the gear that they have set up, which is all Thief Rune gear, mostly Berserkers with a couple of Assassins pieces, um, that all is assuming that you're taking the trait Improved Alacrity. Okay, these are kind of paired up together. The build that Snowcrows lists is based on this trait. Um, Improved Alacrity doesn't really matter, but the alternative trait that you could take is Danger Time here, which gives you extra crit chance if the enemy has slow on. So if you were to take Danger Time, then the build changes a little bit to where you don't need to take Thief Runes. Instead, you can take Scholar Runes because you're going to have that extra critical chance, but you still need to take a couple pieces of Assassins. It's still essentially the same pieces of Assassins. And in fact, if you look at the Power Chrono, the pure DPS variant, it has the Danger Time build on there. And it's the exact same set of gear we would use for quickness. We would just drop a sigil of uh, impact for a sigil of concentration, and then, of course, take a great sword. So, what I generally do personally is I'll run the Danger Time build most of the time because a lot of classes give slow uptime. The particular ones that you're going to see a lot are Condi Renegades. If you have even one of those in your squad, they'll keep slowness on the boss constantly. So you can take danger time because you'll get the benefit of that trait constantly. And if you haven't read it or anything, it just says that you get extra crit chance against slowed enemies, and it applies to your illusions. So basically, as long as slow is on the boss, you're better off taking danger time. For that reason, I recommend personally that you run danger time pretty much everywhere. There are places where you're not going to get the benefit from it, but in most fights, you have a Condi Ren somewhere, or you have a heal brand that can also do a decent bit of slow uptime, or other chronos. Time Warp and Well of Action also do slow uptime. So you have so many extra sources of slow that I'd recommend personally running the Danger Time build. Uh, you don't have to, of course, The improved alacrity build, as they've done it on their site, makes everything a little bit smoother, a little bit easier because your stuff comes off cooldown a little bit faster, and it makes giving quickness a little bit easier. So it's ultimately your choice, but the danger time build should pretty much always give you better DPS. The only exception would be if you have comps without any slowness output, which is very rare these days. With that being said, the standard build as we have it on Snowcrow's site with improved alacrity, it lists two builds here between focus and sword. They're identical builds. One uses a focus, one uses a sword. Both of these have their place. The sword build specifically is for pure DPS because your sword phantasm, the phantasmal swordsman here, does a lot of DPS to your target. But that's the only real benefit that sword gives you, is it's the highest DPS weapon other than focus. On the contrary, your focus does a little bit of damage because your focus also gives you access to a phantasm. It's just a slightly lower damage phantasm, the warden here. But you do gain the benefit of having your temporal curtain for a pull on ads or some extra CC or whatever it may be. So in a lot of cases, focus will be better if you need to pull ads like Slothosaur or maybe Veil Guardian if you're side tanking or various fights like that. But if you don't need the pull, then sword will give you more DPS if you care about some extra DPS. If not, you can just take focus everywhere. It's no big deal. So if you have to default to a weapon, focus is your better option just because it has the pull if needed. But if you're focusing more on DPS, sword will give you more damage. But ultimately, that's your decision. Aside from that, offhand weapon, your second weapon will always be a greatsword. This used to be kind of depending on the build you ran, but now it's just always greatsword. It's always more DPS. No real exception there. Everything else is a mixture of berserker and assassins. The exact amount of assassin's gear you have is dependent on having spotter from your druid or your soul beast if you have one. If you don't have spotter, you theoretically could run a different build with different runes, but I would just recommend that again if you're focusing on DPS, that you take this food here, a bowl of curry butternut squash soup. That gives you the extra precision that you may lose if you don't have a druid with you. Again, only if you're focusing on DPS. If not, you can just stick to the normal food. Who really cares? If you're just giving quickness, none of that matters. All right, but yeah, those are only two real variants. They're going to be sword sword or sword focus, depending on whether you need a pull or not.
Okay.
Gear makes sense so far?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have any questions about any of the alternative set that I mentioned?
So for the danger, yeah. For the danger time, the only thing different is coloring.
That's the main difference. Your scholar runes will be the biggest difference. You can take a little bit less assassin gear. The build, or actually, assassin ring. Yeah, the only other difference than scholar runes would be that you don't need an assassin's ring. You can keep a berserker ring.
Okay.
Otherwise, it's just the runes. All right. Anything else?
No.
Okay. Let's move on to traits then. For these, there are a couple alternatives that you can take in certain situations, but I'll just kind of run through the ones that we take by default that Snowcrows has listed and just briefly touch on the ones we're not taking. Starting from the top down, we have the domination trait line. This is your main source of DPS, or not your main source of DPS. This is your DPS option if we're looking at quickness builds. There's an alternative trait line to this, which is inspiration that you could take as a power quickness chrono, but I'll touch on that later. Within domination, though, the first trait that we take is Bountiful Blades. That's specifically helpful because we're using a greatsword. That just makes it so that your greatsword 4 specifically spawns another berserker. That's the biggest bonus of this. So if I cast this on the boss, it summons 2 berserkers there instead of just one extra one. So it gets you not only a little bit more damage, but also makes it so that you get 2 clones when you cast your Greatsword 4 instead of just one. So it helps with damage, and it also helps with keeping quickness up because you get that extra clone when you use a Greatsword 4. That's critical to the build, so we always take that as long as we're taking Greatsword, which is pretty much always. Next to that one, the next one that we take is Egotism. That's in the middle trait line there, where you deal increased strike damage with lower health percentage than you, which should be pretty much always, unless you're in a really tough situation. But basically, that's just free damage. The other 2 traits don't really give you any benefit. The bottom trait gives you quickness, and the top trait removes boons, which are fine maybe if you're soloing stuff in open world, but for raids, we don't really care about either of those. In the last trait that we're taking is Vicious Expression, where you and your illusions deal increased strike damage to foes without boons, and disabling a foe removes boons. So basically, for raid bosses, we're always dealing extra damage for that. The other 2 traits have their place, I suppose, but not for raids. The second trait there, Mental Anguish, says your Shatter skills deal more damage, which is good, but most of your damage comes from the phantasms, not from the shatter. So we're going to use what trait amplifies the phantasm damage more than anything, which is that top one. All right, our next trait line that we'll take is Dueling, and this is your true DPS one. That top one, like I said, is the DPS alternative to Inspiration, but this trait Dueling is where most of your damage is going to come from. For that reason, this trait is never swapped out on the quickness builds. Within this one, our first trait just says that your phantasms have fury. Simple enough. You want your phantasms to crit because they're most of your damage. The middle trait that we take is Fencer's Finesse, where you gain this ferocity stacking effect when you or your illusions, meaning a clone or a phantasm, strikes with a one-handed sword. And you're going to strike with a sword yourself a lot, and you're going to summon a lot of phantasms with swords a lot. So you're going to keep up Fencer's Finesse without too much issue for a lot of the time. The other 2 don't really do anything for you here. One of those traits is useful for a Condi Mesmer build, but for our case, that bottom trait is the only one that really gives us extra damage. And finally, our last trait here, Superiority Complex, just says that your crits deal more damage. Crit damage against disabled foes is further increased. So you do extra damage, and you do even more damage when a foe is disabled. Disabled basically is any hard CC plus fear and taunt. That's not really going to play a part, the CC, for the most part. Sometimes it will, but mostly you're just taking this for the extra crit damage. Finally, in the Chronomancer trait line, the first trait that we're going to take is Time Catches Up, and I think Snooker still lists that. This one is mostly optional. And I say optional because it's either this one or the top trait, Delayed Reactions. And delayed reactions there says that disabling a foe slows them, which is good for you, gives you extra crit damage or crit chance if you're taking danger time. But another important aspect of this is that when you disable a foe, then you gain the superiority complex buff, where you gain bonus crit damage on foes that are disabled. So not only does delayed reactions give you the extra slow up time for danger time, but it also gives you a little bit of an extra damage boost for superiority complex. Now it's minor, it's only a couple seconds there, so if this happens at the wrong time and you don't have any phantasms up, you're not really going to see any benefit from this. But if it happens at the ideal time and you have multiple phantasms, then this could be a lot of extra damage. But because it's somewhat RNG based, kind of depending on where it is in your rotation, it's not really taken as a standard, because that middle trait, Time Catches Up, says that activating a shatter gives them super speed and your shadows deal increased damage. That's guaranteed damage that we're going to have throughout the fight. So it's a little more reliable to take Time Catches Up. But if you're taking danger time, or if you're in a squad with other chronos who are also taking danger time, then it'll usually be worth it to take delayed reactions just to keep slow up time really high on the boss. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, if you have something like a Condi Renegade in there, you of course don't need to worry about slow up time at all, and you can just stick with Time Catches Up. But that one's somewhat optional depending on the team comp. The middle trait is just more consistent, but the top trait can be better depending on when you actually disable.
Okay.
The middle. I'll talk about this one real quick. Flow of time is one of the default traits that you have. That just says you gain alacrity for each clone you shatter. For that reason, your alacrity is usually going to be a little bit better than everybody else's, except for maybe the renegade if you have one. Because of that trait, since you're shattering pretty frequently, you'll usually have really good alacrity. So if other people start dropping alacrity for some reason around you and you don't, it's probably because of this trait. Just an FYI. Nothing you need to work around. The middle trait here, as I mentioned, is either going to be danger time or improved alacrity. Danger time I already talked about. Improved alacrity makes the alacrity that you have stronger, so it reduces your cooldown by 50% rather than. I'm sorry. Yeah, it reduces it right by 50% rather than 33. What that means for you is, for quickness at least, your skills are going to come off cooldown sooner. And because of that trait that I just mentioned, flow of time, you're going to have a lot of alacrity, more than enough, which means because your skills are coming off cooldown sooner, you can pump out quickness faster than you could if you didn't have improved alacrity. Because you can get more shatters off, you can get more wells of action off, all that jazz. So improved alacrity makes your life as a quickness giver much easier, makes it much simpler to pump out that quickness constantly. You just lose the damage that comes from the extra crit chance of danger time. And this is going to be up to you. If, like I kind of said already a couple of times, if you want to focus on damage, I'd say danger time is your better bet. If you focus on quickness, if your focus is more on giving quickness than doing damage, then you can just stick with improved alacrity. It makes your life a lot easier. So that trait is mostly just up to you. There's no right answer there. It depends on what you're looking for when you're on that fight. And then the last trait, of course, is seize the moment. That gives quickness for each shatter. That one's not negotiable. That's where most of your quickness is going to come from. It also is why you always want to be near your allies, because if we do a shatter, you may be able to see this, but there's a little AoE around me that appears, and you, when you do a shatter. Those little AoEs are the bounding regions for your quickness. So you want to make sure that when you shatter, you have an ally within that range. Otherwise, they won't get the quickness from seize the moment. Are you cool with those trait lines so far? I'll talk about inspiration briefly, real quick.
Yeah.
Okay. Inspiration is a trait line that you can drop domination for. And I think, I don't know if Snowcruise even has it anymore. They used to.
No, no, they
They
don't.
don't. They don't have it. That is a shame, because a lot of people really like the inspiration build. So this build, the way it works, instead of domination, we drop inspiration, and I'm kind of going to make this up as I go because I don't really remember which traits it is. I think it's irrelevant, and 3. Sorry, I didn't mean to ping that. I didn't mean to ping that either. Sorry. Here, I'm gonna paste this build for you just so you can see, just to look at the inspiration trait line specifically. So within, yeah, and the first 2 traits, as I mentioned, I have 1 and 2 there. Those don't really matter, because if you look at them and look at the other traits, pretty much everything in inspiration is defensive in some form. The only trait that we really would take inspiration for is the final trait there, blurred inscriptions, as I linked in chat. The way inspiration works is you lose a lot of damage, but in turn you gain the access to give your allies Aegis and to give yourself distortion. Distortion specifically is really, really nice to have, because distortion works kind of like Aegis in that it'll protect you from certain attacks, but distortion is better, because when you have distortion, you are invulnerable rather than just blocking attacks, which can get you through stuff that would normally kill you. So if you've done Veil Guardian, the greens, if you skip the greens, you know how that deals a big burst of damage to everybody in the squad. Well, if you take an Inspi Chrono and use Distortion, and I'll get to that in a little more in a sec, it completely prevents that damage from hitting you. whereas Aegis doesn't protect it. You can't block it. You can't dodge it. You can't do anything to prevent it, but you can distort it with distortion. It can also prevent you from dying to Sabbatha's Flame Mole. If you've seen that, you can just use distortion and walk right through it. And similar mechanics with other bosses. So distortion is really, really nice because it protects you from stuff that normally nothing can protect you from. It also gives you access because of the blurred inscriptions and the way this trait inspiring distortion works. These two traits work together really well so that whenever you use a signet, usually your signet of the ether, but if you take inspiration, you'll also take signet of inspiration, as I've linked here. Using a signet gives you distortion, which is what blurred inscription does. And then because of inspiring distortion, when you get distortion, you give your allies Aegis. So for that reason, you're just chilling right there. So if you were to use a signet with inspiration, then I would get Aegis because you get distortion. It's kind of how the chain works. So taking inspiration allows you to give your allies Aegis and yourself distortion, which is really nice, especially when you're running signets. And when we take inspiration, we usually pair that up with signet of inspiration as well, as I linked, because blurred inscriptions, that trait that I linked earlier, makes it so that your signet of inspiration affects 10 people instead of 5, which is just a boon extension. So not only does it give you better defensive utilities, but it also makes boons on the squad generally a little bit better because you're extending everybody's boons every time you have that signet up. So it's much easier to maintain boons with this build, and it gives you access to distortion and Aegis. The trade-off, though, is that you trade a ton of damage for it. You do very, very little damage on an Inspiration Chrono compared to the STM Chrono, which is the Domination build.
Okay. What skill would you put Signet of Inspiration instead
It
of?
would it would replace Mantra of Pain.
Okay.
So normally we have your Well of Action, Disenchanter, and the Mantra. The Well of Action is critical for every quickness build nowadays. The Disenchanter is important because it gives you access to another clone that you can shatter for quickness. Mantra is the only one that's just purely for DPS, so that'd be the first one we drop for Signet of Inspiration.
Okay.
All right. Additionally, this isn't always true, but additionally, you'll often see that with Inspiration, people will take a shield offhand instead of a sword or a focus, or instead of a great sword. Part of the benefit of that, and most of the reason that it's taken on Inspiration builds, is because this thing does not have a target cap. If you look at the description, there's no max number of targets, which means when you use this, it can hit all 10 members of your squad. So a really good combination to use is using your Shield 5, and if you have Continuum split up, you can of course go into that. But using Shield 5 and then Signet of Inspiration would immediately give 10 people quickness and alacrity. So it's really strong skill to use when you're on Inspiration, since you can pair it with your Signet pretty well. You're under no obligation, of course, to do that. The shield is just something that's often used, but you can run the standard sword, greatsword, or sword focus, greatsword, or really any weapon set you want at this point, because you can provide plenty of quickness no matter what you do. But yeah, so that's pretty much your choice. If you run an inspiration build, just know that you are giving up most of your DPS for it. Again, if you're focusing more on quickness, who cares? But if you're focusing on DPS, then it is very impactful. All right. Are we good with traits? Do you have any questions about any of the traits we talked about? Okay. I know I'm talking a lot. Sorry if it's too much, just let me know.
No, you are fine.
Okay.
I'm just. I think we are good. I think it makes sense so far. So.
Okay. Good, good, good. All right. With that, let's move on to talk about your utility skills and weapon skills and all that. So for your utility skills, we'll just start from your heal and go to the right. For your heal skill, we'll always take Signet of the Ether. This isn't really one that you ever swap out because your signet's used to reset your phantasms, and your phantasms give damage and clones. So we always want signet, and we use it as part of the rotation to keep up damage and to keep up quickness. So this is a really, really important heal skill to use, and you'll never swap this out on anything as long as you're giving quickness.
Okay.
The next three utility skills, I kind of touched on it already, but it is going to be your Mantra of Pain, your Well of Action, and your Phantasmal Disenchanter. That's these three dudes here. The Well of Action is critical for maintaining quickness. You can't just maintain quickness with Shatters anymore. At one point you could, but now they nerfed that trait a little bit, so now you actually need the Well to go with it. The Disenchanter, as I mentioned, is good for damage, but it's also important to give you that extra clone. And your Mantra, of course, is pure DPS. So even if you don't run Inspiration, you may want to swap Mantra out for something else. For example, in some fights, you may want to take Blink to get somewhere really quickly. Doom is an example of where I've seen it, but in a lot of fights, you may want to take Blink. You may want to take Feedback on a certain fight, on certain fights that have lots of projectiles. Matthias is one. If you dare take a quickness build there or a power build there, you could take Feedback instead of it there. You could take a portal if you need to on certain things. You could even take a Well of Recall if you don't trust your Alacrity. If you see that there's no source of Alacrity, whatever it may be, you can take that to help with Alacrity uptime. The gist of it is your Mantra of Pain is your most expendable skill. So that's the one you'll drop if you want to take something else other than these three core skills. For your elite skill, the default as we usually have it is Time Warp. Now, strictly speaking, Time Warp isn't necessary to maintain quickness, but it is a nice way to get quickness up at the beginning of a fight or at the beginning of a burn phase. It doesn't give a ton of quickness anymore. It only lasts 5 seconds to give a total of 5.5, 6 seconds, I think. So it's not a ton of quickness, but it does bridge the gap. If your shatters are on cooldown, or if you drop Alacrity, or if you're at the start of a burn phase, whatever it may be. One way it's often used, as I mentioned, to start a fight so that you can drop the Time Warp first and then start your opener. Because normally, if you don't have a Time Warp up, your opener takes a little bit longer, which means giving quickness takes a little bit longer. So your entire subgroup has less quickness for the start of their burst. So we always see a lot is you drop Time Warp and then we start the opener. And then at this point, you're already giving quickness because you're shattering, so it doesn't matter anymore. But for those first couple of seconds, you want to make sure that quickness is given to everybody, or as many people as you can. So Time Warp is a really good tool for filling that gap at the beginning of a fight. You don't need it, though, as I said. You can just let quickness drop for the first second or two, and then you can maintain quickness once you started your continuum split, theoretically, in a perfect world. In instances like that, you may want to drop Time Warp for a CC skill. That's really your only other one that we usually take. For a fight like Samurag or maybe Gorseval or other fights where you have break bars that you need to handle, you have two main CC options. One of them is your Signet of Humility. This one is a quick, really heavy break bar bursting skill. This does 600 break bar damage, but it does it instantly because it's a single cast. So it's really, really good for that. But an alternative to that is your Gravity Well, which does more CC, or does, actually, I think it does the same amount of CC, but this does it CC over its duration, because if we drop the well, it does 3 pulses, as you see here. And each pulse of that does CC. So it does the same amount of CC, but it takes a little bit longer. But the benefit of one over the other is if you look at the cooldown on Gravity Well, it's 90 seconds, right? The cooldown on your Signet of Humility is a little bit longer at 120 seconds. So one may be a little bit better than the other. If you have frequent break bars, you may want to take Gravity Well. But if you're focused purely on breaking a bar as quickly as possible, Mo is going to be your best bet since it's quicker than Gravity Well is. But those are your two main alternatives if you need CC. Otherwise, you'll just stick with Time Warp. This can be a safety net for you. It can be something to use at the start of the fight, or you may just never use time warp. That happens every once in a while. It doesn't really matter.
Mm.
Um, but it's really just those three. Mass Invis is not something you'll usually take. It's something you can take in like in between fights, but you won't really ever take it for a raid. All right. Does our
Okay.
utility skills make sense? Do you have any questions about them?
Let me see. No.
Okay. Let's talk about weapon skills and shatters and all that. So the chrono specific mechanic or mesmer stuff is your shatters and your continuum split. So your shatters each serve a purpose. Your F1 shatter, your first one is split second. That gives you that will give you the same boons, but that one is mostly for damage. It does the most power damage of any of your shatters, and that'll be our priority shatter to use whenever you have 3 clones, because it does additional damage per clone up, which is indicated by the little icons above your shatters. Uh, that'll be our main one we use, partially because it's higher damage, partially because it has the lowest cooldown of any of your shatters. The second one, Rewinder, does a little bit of damage, a little bit of confusion. So this will be an extra shatter that we'll use, maybe when you have 0 or 1 clones. It gives you a little bit of extra damage and a little bit of extra quickness because of STM. Your third shatter is strictly for CC. It doesn't do any damage. So we'll only ever use this third shatter if you need to CC, if you need to break a bar. Otherwise, we just avoid this third shatter because it gives nothing other than break bar damage. And then your F4, of course, is your continuum split, whatever your fourth shatter is. And your continuum split, as I'm pretty sure you've played with it, basically sets a point in time that you revert back to after a certain duration. The duration of it depends on how many clones you have. So if I'll generate some clones real quick. So if I get 3 clones up, or you can generate some clones real quick, when I use continuum split, it creates a continuum rift at your location that you automatically snap back to when continuum split ends. If you do a continuum split with 0 clones, you're only limited to about 1.5 seconds. It's very, very short. So normally what we'll try to do is get a couple of clones generated and then go into continuum split and use all your special stuff in there. Because once you snap out a continuum split, it resets your position, your health, and your ability cooldowns. What it does not reset, though, is your phantasms. Your phantasms themselves will still stay out, which means your clones will still generate properly. Which is why inside a continuum split, our goal is to do as much as possible, basically get as many phantasms off and get as much quickness generated as possible, since all that is going to reset after continuum split ends. Continuum split can break you out of stuns, and it can free you from certain mechanics if you use it properly. But mostly we'll just use it for the opener specifically to get basically the big burst of damage and quickness done at the start of the fight.
Okay.
All right. Let me reset this guy real quick. So, aside from that, I'll just talk about. Do you have a question? Do you want to ask something real quick?
No, just I asked during the rotation.
Okay, yeah. Well, let's talk about the rotation because that'll be the next thing that we finally get to. Because I know I've been talking your ear off so far. For the rotation, what it revolves around is getting as many phantasms generated as possible. This is true for the power chrono the same way it is for the quickness chrono. And for you, that means your phantasms are going to be your phantasmal swordman on your sword offhand, your disenchanter, and your phantasmal berserker on your greatsword. Those are your 3 phantasm skills. Those are also the 3 skills that get reset by your signet of the ether. With those skills, our goal is to use them as frequently as possible. You use all of these off cooldown at all times in the rotation, and at certain points we'll use the signet to reset these and then use them again, since these do most of your damage and are responsible for most of the clones that are going to give quickness. When we're on each weapon set, we have a slightly different priority. When we're on sword, your priority is to get your swordsman off as quickly as you can, and then use Blurred Frenzy off cooldown. Blurred Frenzy is a really good bit of damage. It's your quick burst damage skill, so that's a really important one to use as much as we can while we're on sword. Um, those are your two main skills that we're going to use on here. On Greatsword, we're going to focus on three main skills, which is your Berserker, your Phantasm, your Greatsword 2, Mirror Blade, and your 3, Mind Step. Those all do a good bit of damage, and they all summon, or two of them summon clones. So one thing to note, your Greatsword 4 summons 2 Phantasms and 2 clones, but your Greatsword 2 will summon a clone when it hits. Now this is a clone and not a Phantasm, meaning it doesn't do any damage really, but it does get a clone to summon really quickly. And then your Greatsword 3 is just a good bit of damage. So when we're on Greatsword, we're going to focus 4, 2, 3, and then just use those off cooldown basically, all three of them. And while
Four,
you're
two,
on Great
three.
4, 2, 3 when you first get there. And this goes into the kind of intricacies. The exact order isn't critical, but doing 4, then 2, then 3 makes sure your clones or your phantasms generate clones kind of at a more convenient time.
And then
Okay, you
after,
can. Sorry, go ahead.
and then after you do that first, do you just spam them? Or do you wait?
So you do the 4, 2, 3, and then we'll do 2 as soon as it's ready, which will be shortly after that.
Yeah.
And then after that, we'll do 3, 4, 2 when they're all ready.
Okay.
Again, the exact order of that doesn't matter. If you do 4, 3, 2, it's not going to be the end of the world. Your clones will just be slightly off, but it should be no big deal. But that's our goal on Greatsword. 4, 2, 3, and then another 2, and then a 3, 4, 2.
Okay.
Right, that's all we ever really do on Greatsword. One thing to just keep in mind is that focusing on just the weapon skills, that's all the rotation is. But usually on Greatsword, you'll also use Disenchanter, your Phantasmal Disenchanter. Because as I mentioned, we're using that off cooldown, so usually your Disenchanter will come off cooldown while you're on Greatsword. Which means somewhere in the middle of all that, you're going to also use Disenchanter, probably. But you're still going to maintain that same rotation, just throw an extra Disenchanter in there somewhere. The same holds true if your Well of Action comes off cooldown. This one you want to use anywhere in the rotation that it lands, because without it, you're gonna start dropping quickness. So that 4, did I say 4, 3, 2?
You did 4, 2, 3,
4, 2, 3.
and then after is 2, 2, 3, 4, 2.
Right. Okay, just make sure I didn't tell you wrong, because sometimes I forget what I said. But yeah, so keep that in mind. And then your Well of Action and Disenchanter, as soon as they're off cooldown, usually your Disenchanter will come off cooldown here, but not always. Your Well of Action sometimes will, sometimes won't. That one you just kind of got to watch it. And when it's off cooldown, try and use it right away without interrupting your other skills. Okay?
Okay.
Your auto attack, you'll just kind of do in between all this. Of course, you just keep using that. Your
Yeah.
auto attack is what's that?
Nothing, I say, yeah.
Okay. Your auto attack is a beam of continuous damage. It doesn't have a chain on Greatsword, which means it doesn't matter if you interrupt it. It does the same amount of damage, so feel free to interrupt it to do any of these other skills as they come off cooldown. Doesn't really matter at all. The only other thing you may also want to do is another thing to use off cooldown is your Mantra of Pain, if you're taking that. If you're not, this doesn't apply, but if you're taking Mantra of Pain, that'll be another thing that you just kind of want to use off cooldown. That's strictly for DPS, though. So if you're just focusing on quickness, the mantra doesn't matter at all. That's just going to help your DPS. threw a lot at you, but let's move on to the sword set, unless you have any questions.
No, I think I'm good.
Okay. On our sword set, this one's relatively simple, but on your sword is where you're going to use your signet to reset your phantoms. That's always going to be true. On sword, that's where you use your signet. Even if it comes off cooldown on greatsword, don't use your signet until you get to sword, because it gives much more damage to your clones and it helps not waste clones for your shatters. Um, on sword, like I mentioned, we really only have two skills to focus on.
I'm 5 and
Your
2.
swords, exactly. So when we switch to sword, we're going to start with your sword 5. And usually at this point in your rotation, your signet's going to be up. So we're going to start with sword 5, and then reset your phantasms with your signet, and then use sword 5 again, and then disenchanter right after. Okay? So that'll be 5, signet, 5, disenchanter.
Wait, 5 segment, 5 disenchanted.
Yes. And this is another one where if you get these in the wrong order, it doesn't matter terribly. It just may throw off your clone's timing a little bit. But you always want to make sure that you do your 5 first before your signet. If you do the signet first, you're essentially going to lose a clone, which may cause quickness issues. It may not, but it may. So as much as you can, you want to make sure that you get your sword 5 first and then your signet, okay?
Okay.
So 5 signet, 5 disenchanter. After those, that's the most important part of this whole sword loop. After that, you're just going to use your sword 2 off cooldown and then do auto attack chains. And then when sword 2 comes off cooldown again, you're going to use it. What you're waiting for here is your second sword 5. I guess it's technically your third. So you'll do, as I mentioned, your 5 signet, 5 disenchanter, and then you're just waiting for sword 5 to come back off cooldown. And actually, I'll tell you what. Let me stream for you just in case that's easier. But once you get those 3 off, you're just waiting for your sword 5 to come off cooldown again. While you're waiting for it, we can use a sword 2 whenever that's ready, and then just do auto attacks in between. And that's all. We're just going to see to your auto attack, throw some sword 2s, and then as soon as you see that 5 ready, go ahead and use the sword 5, and then we swap to greatsword and start the greatsword loop.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
I think so.
Okay. One thing I will say is chrono can be a little bit confusing because you kind of got a lot going on, a lot of keys to press, a lot of things that come off cooldown at random times that you kind of have to roll with. I'll also mention this about chrono just because of our, I guess you can say, unique situation that it relies on speed pretty heavily to keep up quickness. So if you delay a phantasm, or if you throw some extra auto attacks in between here and there, you may start dropping quickness. You may not. You may be perfectly fine. But for in a long rotation, if there are any delays between your phantasms here and there, it may cause quickness drops depending on the delay. Now, that's again what your time warp is for, to help fill any of those gaps that may arise. And especially, I tell this to pretty much any chrono that's learning quickness for the first time. The build on Snowcrow's site is an absolute minimum boon duration. In fact, they don't even list any for that build because it's improved alacrity. But if you're running danger time, you want a sigil of concentration. If you're not running danger time, you can just stick with their standard build. But if you're running danger time, definitely want a sigil of concentration. In either case, though, while you're learning this, we're not going to really be able to test on the golem here today, but while you're learning this, as far as quickness, feel free to take extra boon duration, which means Whatever's easier for you. If you have legendary armor, take some diviner armor. If you have legendary trinkets, take diviner trinkets. Maybe use pack runes or leadership runes to help with boon duration. Because it's hard to maintain quickness. It is for anybody. There's nothing special about this situation. It's hard to maintain quickness when you're first learning this rotation. And it may help you to have some extra boon duration for a while until you get more comfortable. You may be perfectly fine, or you may not. Everybody's a little bit different. So if you have trouble maintaining quickness on an actual fight, try giving yourself some extra boon duration. If you find that it's difficult to hit all these abilities back to back to back to back to back, with a reasonable amount of speed, while also doing your shatters, which I haven't talked about, but I will. Take that sigil of concentration, take some diviner gear, get your boon duration up, and just kind of get comfortable with it, and find where you can maintain quickness. If you have to take some diviner gear, it doesn't matter, because the quickness is more important than your damages. As an STM, you're never going to do a ton of damage. So nobody's going to expect you to be right up there at the top of the DPS meter. So just take as much concentration as you need to keep up quickness, and that'll be a trial and error thing, not something that we can really figure out right here and now.
Right.
Okay. I'll mention shatters real quick, and then we can of course get back to questions if you have any. But your shatters, I kind of mentioned what their purpose is. Your F1 shatter is your main one, which means you'll use F1 shatter anytime you have 3 clones up. One thing to kind of note about the way clones work is once you have 3 clones active, indicated above your shatter bar there, if you summon another clone after those 3, it immediately dies and is not usable. And when I mentioned earlier about wasting clones, that's what I mean, is having another clone get summoned while you already have 3 available. We want to avoid that as much as possible because those clones are how you give quickness, right? So whenever you have 3 clones up, you want to use your F1 shatter. Sometimes your F1 shatter is going to be off cooldown, or it's going to be on cooldown when you get 3 clones. When that happens, just wait. Wait until that F1 comes back off cooldown. Now, when F1's on cooldown, you can, and I say can because you don't need to, but you can use your F2, your rewinder, with 0 or 1 clones. It gives you a little bit of extra damage, and it can help a little bit more with quickness, especially if you're struggling with it. This is optional. You don't have to do this at all. You can just stick with F1. But if you want that extra damage or want to try to get a little bit extra quickness, you can do that F2 shatter. But you have to only do it with 0 or 1 clones. Any more than that, and you're going to throw off your clone timing so that you won't have 3 when F1 comes off cooldown. I know I'm talking a lot again, but does that make sense? Are you clear on that?
Why would you do F2 with 0 clones?
Because the F2, the damage that it does, if you look at his tooltip, does that damage even if you don't have any clones up. It also gives quickness from Seize the Moment around you, even with 0 clones. So basically the way your shatters work is if you hover over them, the damage and the boons that you generate per clone, but you are counted as a clone, right? So instead of your shatters doing 1, 2, or 3 clones, it's really more like 2, 3, or 4 clones, because you are essentially a clone that's always up. That's just not counted. So if I go over here and do a shatter with F1, I get the 1 clone damage because I am that 1 clone. If I summon a clone and I shatter again, that gives me the 2 clone damage because now there's me and my other clone. Kind of a weird way the wording works, but you're treated as a clone, which is why a 0 clone shatter, if we call it that, will still do damage and will still give quickness because you're that clone that's shattering. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So why would you just bam it off cooldown?
Your F1, yeah.
No,
Your F2.
Oh wait.
Yeah, you can as well. You just want to make sure that you don't use it with any more than 1 clone. If you're a little late on it and 3 generate like instantly, just hold off on it.
Yeah,
As
Like,
long as it has 0 or 1, yeah, you use it off cooldown, like you said.
because like I was just wondering why don't you just use F1 then F2 by the way.
You can absolutely do that. That's a great way to do it. Yeah, absolutely. You're not always going to be able to just because the cooldown of F1 and F2 are different.
Yeah, of course.
But yeah, sure. You can do that every time you can, sure.
Okay.
All right. There's one thing I haven't touched on that, which is your continuum split, and that's its own animal to address. Before I get to that though, do you have any other questions about the rotation thus far?
So I'm guessing you start off on sword and do the 5 signet 5 disenchanted first,
Mm-hmm.
and then you go into sword.
Yep, that's it. Uh, for you, I think, and not just for you, but for any new chrono, especially new quickness chrono, the tricky part with the rotation is going to be figuring out how to fit in all your utility skills as well. The weapon rotation, I don't think will be too hard. What'll be difficult is doing the weapon rotation while shattering off cooldown, while giving the quickness well off cooldown. It gets a little tricky when you try to do all that at one time during the rotation. But all right, with that in mind, let's talk about continuum split. Your continuum split is primarily only going to be used in your opener. Its main purpose in your opener is to give lots of extra quickness at the start of the fights to sustain everybody. If you don't do a continuum split, you can still maintain quickness. It's just much harder. The continuum split makes it much, much easier for the beginning of the fight. It's also used to do lots of damage. So your burst, if you want to call it that, quickness and power burst, is going to come from continuum split. It has a real long cooldown, 105-second cooldown, so you're only really going to use this at the beginning of the fight and generally after a phase, or at the beginning of some major phase. So like on Veil Guardian, you'll use this at the start and maybe at the start of the second phase, or maybe the start of the third phase.
Okay.
You don't need to use it off cooldown. In fact, a lot of chronos don't ever use continuum split a second time. You just start the fight with it, and then just never use it again. And that's fine. You don't need continuum split after the opener. It'll help with your damage and give you a little extra damage boost. It might give you a little bit extra quickness if you're having a hard time with it or if it's starting to run out. But strictly speaking, you don't ever need to use it again. You can, but you don't need to. But I'll get into how to use it later in the fight, which is slightly different than at the beginning. So, at the start of the fight, continuum split is basically the first thing we do. You're not hitting it right away, but we're going to go into continuum split as the first major thing, which means before we go in, we need a couple of clones. A 0 clone continuum split is way too short to get anything useful done. So our goal in an ideal situation is to do a 2 clone continuum split. That gives you just enough time to get all the important stuff off. Now I'm going to tell you this again, for most new chronos, a 2 clone continuum split is very difficult. It's tight. You do not have much time while you're in there. Which means if you want, we can do a 3 clone continuum split at the beginning. It makes your life much simpler, much easier. It essentially just lowers your burst DPS. But it makes the continuum split much more consistent. It makes sure that you can get all of your abilities off while you're inside of it. So I'll go over the 2 clone continuum split, but then I'll show you how to do it with 3 clones to make your life a little bit easier. Okay.
Okay.
For the 2 clone continuum split, we're going to start with your sword 5. Then we're going to use your sword 3, which is an illusionary leap. That just creates a clone at your target destination. I'm going to get out of combat real quick, but I heard you just joined the stream, so I'll show you in just a sec what this will look like. I'll do it at full speed, and then I'll kind of break down what I'm doing here. So this would be assuming that we have time warp or something. We'll do 5, 3, Great Sword 2, and then Great Sword 4 into your continuum split. So that was a lot really quickly. Let me break it down for you just so that we're really clear on what's going on. Slowing it down, we got your sword 5. Basically, this is a precast. You want to get your sword 5 running so that A, it can do some damage, but B, it gives you that clone. It doesn't give you the clone right away, but that clone will happen while you're inside a continuum split, so it gives you a little bit of extra damage and quickness while you're in there. So I'll shatter it, and we'll do this again. We'll do your sword 5, and then your 3. That 3 gives you the first clone, and then we're done on sword. We'll swap over to great sword, stop auto-attacking, and then at this point we'll only have one clone, so we need a second one. That second one will come from your great sword 2. So once we're on great sword, we'll do 2, and that gives you your second clone. With that, we're ready to start your continuum split. To start it, we're going to start using our greatsword 4, but midway through, we're going to activate continuum split because this is an instacast and doesn't need a channel, which means you can use it in the middle of other skills. So we're going to use it in the middle of your greatsword 4, not after. The reason we do it in the middle is because if we start it before your greatsword 4's animation finishes, it'll reset the greatsword 4's cooldown, and you'll be able to use it again after continuum split is over. Which means that what this will look like is greatsword 4, continuum split somewhere in the middle of it. And then if we end continuum split, you see our greatsword 4 is back off cooldown. So, take you through this one more time full speed just to make sure we're clear. So we got a sword 5, and then a sword 3, weapon swap, greatsword 2, and then we start continuum split with a greatsword 4. Okay, one more time. We got a 5, 3, 2, 4, and now we're inside a continuum split. Now that's how you start it with 2 clones. Okay.
Okay.
Inside a continuum split, I'll show you what we're doing in outside of it first, and then I'll show you how tight it is once we're inside. Inside a continuum split, greatsword 4 is on cooldown, so our goal is to get phantasms and quickness. That means we're going to use our disenchanter. That means we're going to use our signet. Our signet next because that resets our phantasms. We're going to drop our quickness well because that's just as important as our phantasms. And then we'll use our 2 phantasms that we summoned, your greatsword 4 and your disenchanter. And that's all the important stuff. Then we're just going to fill the rest of the time with damage. In this case, your greatsword 3 is about all you have time for. So we're going to do a greatsword 3 to finish, and that's about all the time you have in continuum split. Okay, let me show you this full speed real quick, and I'll show you how tight this is. Once we do it with 2 clones, let me wait for my weapon swap to come off cooldown. I'm just going to run through it real quick. I can't talk as fast as I'll do it, so I'm just going to run through it, and then I'll talk to you after it. I actually started continuous a little bit late there, but that's kind of what it looks like at speed. You get all the important stuff off cooldown, or you get all the important stuff cast inside of it, and then I didn't activate CS early. That's just how quickly it ends with 2 clones. And as soon as it ends, you have all your stuff ready, and we just do it again. We do everything you did inside of continuous split again. That means your greatsword 4, phantasm, reset, quickness well, greatsword 4, and then here's where the written rotation differentiates a little bit, where here you use your greatsword 2 and then swap to sword. But yeah, I'm going to run through it again if you want, but does the continuum split make sense? What we're trying to do inside of it?
Yeah, so, yeah, it does. I think, for continue, disenchanter, signet, for disenchanter, well,
You want to make sure you do a little bit earlier, because if you're late, if any part of your rotation inside of continuum split is late or delayed, the last skill is probably going to get cut off. And we don't want that to be our well of action. That's a really important skill to use. So inside, we want to make sure we use it a little bit sooner.
right.
Now, the exact timing isn't that important. I kind of mentioned we do Your phantasm, then the phantasm, then the signet, and then well. That's not critical that you do it in that exact order. You could do phantasm, phantasm, well, and then signet. That's perfectly fine. It doesn't really matter what order you do it in. You just want to make sure that you make the well, you use the well a little bit earlier so that it's not the last thing you do. But yeah,
Okay.
you got the order of the phantasms right, and then your quickness will at some point a little bit sooner in there. But yeah, ideally it's your 4, your disenchanter, signet, well, 4, disenchanter, and 3. Okay. Now, as I mentioned, it's a really tight window, which means to do this with 3 clones, to do it with a 3 clone CS, it's really easy. Basically, you just wait like an extra second. So instead of doing 5-3, Greatsword 2, and then immediately into continuous split, we're going to do 5-3. Just wait on sword for a minute, and then do your Greatsword 2. And that delay was enough time to get the 3rd clone to generate. Now we have 3 clones and can start the whole CS rotation without any care in the world about how slow we're being or how fast we're being, because we got plenty of time when we have 3 clones. Yeah, if you do start the CS with 3 clones, you do the exact same thing inside of it. You just have more time to make sure you do everything.
Interesting. Okay.
Okay. So, in an ideal situation, in a fight, your goal is to start off with a continuum split. That's pretty much always the first thing you do. After your continuum split's done, you kind of do the rest of that opener, as I said. Basically, it's everything inside of continuum split again. Once that's done, we swap over to sword, and then we start the rotation. Now, your cooldowns are going to be thrown off a little bit, so we're going to do as much of the rotation as you can. The first time you get back to sword after your continuum split, your phantasmal swordsman is going to be on cooldown, and so is your signet. So you're not going to be able to do the exact same rotation, but your goal at that point is just to get two phantasms off, and I'll kind of show you real quick what that looks like, just to show you. So at this point, your signet's on cooldown, and I should have used my disenchanter, but I'm just kind of giving you an idea. So now I'm just waiting for this last sword 5. Because this is the last important thing I can do. My weapon swap's ready, my signet's not ready, so I'm just going to use sword 5 and then get out of here. And I'm back on greatsword. Okay. Once I'm on greatsword, this is the same loop that we talked about. Nothing new here at all. And then from here, the rotation is exactly as we talked about earlier. It's just the first time that you get back to sword that your things are thrown off a little bit. Otherwise, we do continuum split, finish off the opener outside of continuum split, and then start your rotation. That continuum split should give you plenty of quickness to where even if you mess up something or whatever may happen, you should have plenty of quickness to cover you and the rest of your subgroup.
Okay.
Are you with me on the rotation as a whole?
I think so.
I know it's a lot. I know it's complex. Chrono is a complex class for sure. And it's going to take a while to get comfortable with it. I'm not going to lie to you. Chrono's not a class that you just pick up and play. it takes some time to get comfortable with it, but if you understand it, I think You'll be okay. Right. With that, do you want to try it? Do you want to try the CS opener at least to see how that feels, how comfortable you are?
Yeah.
Okay. Whenever you're ready, go for it. I'll try and watch your animations to make sure I see what's going on.
Should I do 3 or 2 clones?
Why don't you try it with, you know what? Try it with 2 first, just so you can feel how fast that continuum split is.
Okay, I'm just trying to remember. So in continuous split, it disenchant heal well for
Yep.
disenchant.
And then, yeah, and then your Greatsword 4, your Berserker again.
Yeah.
And then if you have time, a Greatsword 3, but basically once you do all that, you're just killing time. Do some shatters if you want to. You should have a 3 clone shatter at this point. That'll give you a nice big burst of quickness. Otherwise, you're just DPSing a little bit. But yeah, that's the gist of it. Yeah.
Okay. Wait.
Let me reset them for you real quick.
Hold on. Okay.
What's that? What happened there?
I just lost track.
Oh yeah, fair enough. It's I've talked a lot. I don't blame you at all.
And I had 1 instead of weapon swap.
Ah, okay, gotcha.
So that kind of threw me off.
Yeah, fair enough. And like just to, oh sorry.
I accidentally hit it twice.
Oh, the continuum split.
Yeah.
Ah, yes, the famous double tap. It happens. We all know that. We all know that pain, and it is very irritating when it happens, but it happens. Did you use your signet while you were on sword there?
No.
Okay.
Wait, no. Oh, no.
I don't think you did. I don't think I saw that animation.
Do you want to use Signet on Greatsword?
On sword, not greatsword. You never use it on greatsword.
Oh, yeah.
If you use it on greatsword, I kind of tell you why, just so you're not blindly following me here. Um, the reason we don't want to use it on a greatsword is because if you do use your berserker and then reset with signet and berserker again, that generates a total of 4 clones, right? And if you're waiting for a 3 clone shatter, then you're going to end up wasting a clone, at least one. You might end up wasting both of them. So you're probably going to waste clones if you use your signet on greatsword, but on sword, you're much less likely because you don't generate as many clones on sword. Does that make sense?
Oh, kind of. Wait, say that again.
It's not the worst thing in the world if you do. If you do end up using your signet on greatsword, it's fine. You'll still probably be okay. I would just say if you ever do that in an actual fight, don't shatter F2 at all. Just wait for your 3 clones to be up on F1 at all times. Just because it'll probably make it a little bit tighter, but it's recoverable. And if you want, you don't have to practice here. I mean, you're welcome to. I always invite people to, so I can give you live feedback. But if you want to practice on your own, that's entirely your choice. I don't want to make you feel like you're under a spotlight here or anything. So if you want to practice, you can. I'm here to help. If you don't want to practice here and now, that's perfectly fine. You don't have to.
No. So I have 3.
Okay.
And then maybe 1 or 2 more.
Okay. That'll work.
When do you weapon swap off of sword?
Off of sword?
Yeah. After the second, third swordman?
During the normal rotation, you'll use your swordsman 3 times. Okay, that's your indicator. You'll do swordsman, signet, swordsman to start. After that, the next time you can use swordsman, that's when you weapon swap.
Okay.
So it's the 3rd swordsman. That's your cue for when to use it. You use that swordsman and then immediately weapon swap to greatsword. Okay, and your weapon swap may come off cooldown like a little while before your swordsman does. And that's fine. That's normal. But you're still going to wait until you get that 3rd swordsman and then weapon swap. Okay?
Okay.
I think you did a 1 clone continuum split there.
So I was too fast.
Didn't quite get that sword 3 off, but good up until that.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Dude.
Okay.
That was close, but I should have used her well earlier.
Yeah. Otherwise, though, that was good, and you can get by with that in an actual fight. So, like, if you do end up getting out of continuum split a little earlier than you wanted to, or you didn't quite get the well of action earlier, that's fine. It's not the end of the world because you still have plenty of shatters, and you'll still be able to get plenty of quickness off.
Okay, let's see. So I might get this like a split second, so
Okay, then yeah, you may want to do a 3 clone CS then. It'll definitely make it easier. I wanted you to see the 2 clone second CS just to show you, ideally that's how fast the rotation expects you to be. But um, for now, though, we'll just do a three continuum split. It's no problem at all.
So just
Basically,
wait until you get three.
yeah. What I usually wait for is you start the same way, and then wait to use your greatsword 2 until you see 2 clones appear instead of just 1.
Okay.
It should just take an extra 2 seconds or so.
I was in the mindset of the two.
That's fine. That's fine. You can use your 2 first, and then just wait until you see 3 clones before you use your greatsword 4. That's perfectly fine. There's no written rules about a 3 clone CS. So as long as you don't hit the 4 before your 3 clones, then you're good. There, I bet that felt much better doing that continuum split with 3 clones.
Yeah, it did.
Overall, it looks really good. Can't really judge quickness because the stupid bug, but it looks great. Your rotation looks good for the most part.
Nice.
Nice. There there are of course things here and there that we can always improve on, but overall, I think that was good. That should be fine for a raid as far as quickness goes. There are some specific things I can't really tell, but as far as your rotation, pretty much everything was in the right order. It looks like you were using your well off cooldown, which was good. Um, shatters look pretty good for the most part. I think you're delaying some of the F1 shatters a little bit.
Yeah. And
Which, yeah.
I think I'm doing well, like I said. or two. But that's just because I don't know the time, the timing of everything. So, like
The timing of which one?
this is the first time I played chrono, like actually
Okay, yeah,
attached something. So,
yeah. And yeah, and I don't expect you to be perfect or anything. So for this being your first time, you're doing great. Like the benchmark is 28K, I think. It's
yeah,
not very high. And the fact that you're only 8K off, presumably without infusions and never doing the rotation before, you're doing great. Um, Chrono take is going to take a lot of practice for sure. Um, but the things to focus on really, they're going to help quickness and they're going to help DPS, which is just making sure you do that F1 shatter off cooldown as best you can. And I know you have limitations, and honestly, Chrono is tough for me because there's just a million buttons to press, and I know it's tough in general. Um, but just something to focus on as best you can to make sure that F1 shatter, you're getting that off with 3 clones off cooldown as quickly as you can. The well you're doing fine on, and then of course your disenchanter. Make sure we use that guy off cooldown.
yeah,
Everything else, you seem like you're doing just fine. So just keeping up those 3 things, it'll help quickness and it'll help keep up your DPS really well.
okay.
Um,
But yeah, thank you for your time. Thank you for your
yeah,
time.
of course. Before you go, not to be insensitive or anything, but is there anything in particular that you struggle with, just because of what you explained to me, the issue that you only have one usable hand here? Is there anything that makes this particularly difficult that I can help you maybe come up with an alternative to?
Um, let me think. Not really. I just need to play with it.
Okay, fair enough.
I think it's doable.
Fair enough.
I just need more like to actually play Chrono.
Right. I know for me personally, I wish I had 3 hands. When I play Chrono, man, there have been times where I try to play Chrono and I feel like I'm contorting my hand just because of the way my keys are set up, trying to use 8 different things at once. So it can be tricky to do a really good rotation with it, even at the best of times. But okay, I mean, if you're good, then yeah, just practice it. And I'm sure you'll do great. You're doing well already, so yeah, should be no
Oh,
problem for
can you link that food that you said if I
you.
need
Yeah,
if I
this dude, the bowl of curry butternut squash soup.
yeah. Oh, I did. That 20K was without food or utility.
Oh well, there you go. You'll do even better then when you even have food in an actual raid.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool, but
Okay.
yeah, yeah, no problem. Do you have any other questions or anything else you want to talk about? Any
Uh,
concerns you have? Anything like that?
so if I was gonna take on this build, what kind of what would be the difference? Probably using inspiration.
So tanking kind of depends. It depends mostly on your own preference, honestly. You can tank on this build as is, just with a little bit of toughness. With swords specifically, you have a block with your sword 4. This dude is a sustained block. Well, it's not a sustained block, but it's a channel that can block attacks.
Yeah, I've been pressing that on accident. So
Yeah. One cool thing about it is that if you do block attack, you summon a clone. So if you do hit it on accident, just make sure you block something, and you're actually going to be just fine because you get that extra clone.
nice.
Um, but yeah, if you're tanking with this build, that's pretty much your only defensive option. You can block with that. You can dodge, of course. Your Blurred Frenzy gives you blur, which makes you evade attacks for 1 second. That's not distortion, like I mentioned earlier. It's the same icon, but it's not distortion, which means It's not going to protect you from stuff like Sabbath's Flame Wall, like I mentioned. It's just an evade.
So you were probably playing Shield and in Inspiration.
Depending on the boss, it would definitely make it a lot
Yeah,
easier to tank on Inspiration. Yeah. I think most of the time, when you hear about a chrono tank or when people want a chrono tank, it's usually with Inspiration. It just makes your life easier to distort and to give Aegis and to have your shield. It just makes it easier.
yeah,
Um, with some fights, it's completely unnecessary, like Gorseval. You really don't need to tank on Inspiration because his
yeah.
his attacks don't hurt very much. Um, actually, Gorseval is an interesting one just because that's one fight where you may drop your mantra for mantra of concentration for stability.
Honestly, I just use uh, today on Crucible right now. I've been using Sally Quickman.
Sorry, I only caught part of that. Can you repeat that? I know we're talking
Um,
about Gorseval still.
yeah, but taking on Crucible, I use Sally Quickman and we do like 18k DPS.
Oh, yeah, even better. That's more reliable anyway.
Yeah,
um, I will say though, Chrono has its merits because you could on that fight specifically use a focus instead of a sword, and you can pull in the ads when Gorseval summons them. So Chrono has its place where you may want to play it instead of Firebrand, but definitely a quick brand makes giving quickness, ages, makes everything easier for the most part.
yeah, really. Like I said, when we were talking, I
Mm-hmm.
wanted a Chrono to, if I'll do it as bad and
Um,
need help pushing the dude in Samlock, or
oh
like,
yeah,
or like if we on swap and no one is killing the subs, then I can play just to focus.
there you go.
Yeah.
Uh, with a focus, we didn't really talk about the rotation with the focus, but I'll just mention it real quick. The focus has a slightly longer cooldown than your sword's phantasm does. Just so you know, you'll still use it the same way. You still only use the 5 skill, uh, but it does have a little bit of a different cooldown. So just keep that in mind.
Alright. So, alright. Is it still three? You still do three?
You'll still do 3 for the opener. That's based on your primary sword, not the secondary one. So that's still going to be used the same way. Yeah.
No, no, no. When we get into the rotation, do you three?
Oh, do you use 3 at all? You
Be,
don't. Sorry, I keep interrupting you. I'm sorry.
no, no, no. Because I know with sword you use three swords and then you swap to three sword. Do you do the same thing?
The number of swords. I'm sorry. For focus, because of the difference in cooldown, you won't end up being able to do that third one without delaying it by a lot. Um, so if you use a focus, you'll do the first 2 like normal. And if you're running, let me put it this way: if you take improved alacrity, then yeah, wait for that third one. If you don't take improved alacrity and take danger time, then just swap after the second one because that third one will just take too long. Well, not after the second one, but as soon as you can after the second one, because that third one will usually take another 10 seconds or so.
Very interesting. Okay.
Yeah,
That makes sense.
yeah. You could wait for the third one. It won't really mess with your DPS or your quickness uptime very much. So if it makes it more comfortable for you, since that's kind of what we talked about today, you can just wait for the third one. It's no big deal.
Okay.
All right, but yeah, for tanking, inspiration is easier, more consistent. You can tank any fight on inspiration. Um, but if you wanted to take this build, the domination build, as we'll call this, You can tank some fights on it, some are just much more difficult. So if you want a tank build you can take anything on, definitely run Inspiration with a shield. That'll cover you through any fight.
And what scissor do you use on installations? You
The same ones that I mentioned here, which is Concentration and Force. The Concentration kind of depends also on if you're running Danger Time or Improved Alacrity. If you're running Improved Alacrity, you don't need the Sigil of Concentration. But if you're running Danger Time, you do. Other than that, you can just stick with Force or Force and Impact if you're not running Concentration.
okay? Sounds
If
good.
all right, yeah, I'll just mention this real quick since we're maybe talking about Inspiration. We didn't really talk about the rotation with a shield, but with a shield, it's really really simple. I'll just mention it real quick. You use Shield 5 off cooldown, but it has a very long cooldown. So basically, you do Shield 5 and then swap to your sword. You won't use Greatsword with this build. And then you just sit here for about 30 seconds. And then when you think about it, or even if you don't think about it, you can swap back to sword shield.
Alright.
Everything else you just use off cooldown. It's a relatively simple rotation.
And then do you use yes to that opening?
Your CS is a bit different. It's actually much different. It's a good thing we brought this up. The CS is definitely a fair bit different. So the way it'll work is your shield 4, I'll mention this because it's important to your CS. Your shield 4 is a block, but also summons a phantasm when your block finishes channeling. So for the opener, we're going to start with shield 4 to get that phantasm generated, and then summon another clone with your sword 3, and then that'll give you the 2 that you need for CS. What your CS will look like then is you start with sword or your shield 5 the same way that you do the great sword 4, in that you start channeling in and then continuum split somewhere in while you're casting it. Wow, that took a second. But continuum split while you're casting it, and then once you're inside a continuum split, you'll use your Disenchanter, your Well of Action, your Signet of Inspiration. Remember, we're taking that with the Inspiration build. And then use your Signet of Ether, and use your Disenchanter again. And that's it.
Does
it's not
it
as complex. Sorry.
does it if you swap weapons, so CS doesn't affect when you swap weapons.
No, it does not affect weapon swap cooldowns.
Okay. Because I was wondering why we weren't going into sword. Okay.
Right, yes. Sorry, I didn't mention that. There are a few things that continuum split doesn't reset. It doesn't reset your weapon swap. It doesn't reset your clones or your phantasms, and it doesn't reset trait cooldowns. You don't really have any here that matter for this build, but there are some that have internal cooldowns on them, and it does not reset those.
Alright.
But yeah, so your continuum split, now that I have it reset, will look like your shield, and then your 3, and then we wait, do your shield 5, and then basically just roll your hand across all your utility skills. And then you do it again. And really it is that easy, just rolling them after utility skills, one after the other. And that gives you plenty of quickness. Your Signet of Inspiration with Well of Action means you gotta try to run out of quickness.
Okay. That sounds good.
I heard you start saying something.
Oh. I was just saying that sounds good. I
Okay.
don't think I have any more questions.
Okay. Well, I'd be happy to sit down with you again another time if you do want more help with this, or if you want to, talk about it in a little more detail, or maybe we can sit down again when this stupid quickness bug is fixed in the group training area. Uh,
Yeah,
but yeah, otherwise, just let me know if you have any other questions. Feel free to message me anytime. I'm happy to help with other classes as well if you want. I can mentor mostly anything. So yeah,